We'll go ahead and get started. Thanks a lot for coming out. This is our third session and last session of the day. We're very happy to have Dan Brown here. He's based out of Philadelphia, a designer, architect, and a SketchUp trainer. And this is our beginner SketchUp workshop, so hopefully some of you all are, maybe you've never used even 3D design before, and this will get you started in SketchUp, which in my opinion is a really intuitive and easy to learn and really simple to use tool. But then also, if you were in the previous sessions, you saw that it's also a really powerful, really extensible tool. So it's a good one for you to get started with. I also want to thank Trimble, who's the company that owns SketchUp and develops it, for providing Dan's visit here to us for free, which is really amazing. And also I'd like to thank the NCSU chapter of the American Institute of Architecture students who co-sponsored this event with us. And thanks to Dan for coming to visit us. So hope you enjoy it.
So who wasn't here in either of the morning sessions? What are the new familiar faces? Who's here in the advanced spot? And who's here just for the tech talk just now? All of you. So good mix. Any first-time SketchUp users? This is sort of your first semester using SketchUp. Just some feedback. What's your sort of experience been with it? Anybody can answer? Good or bad? You said you first used SketchUp. What's your
I've never used it.
Oh, you've never used it.
Yeah.
Okay.
This is my first.
Oh, so this is yours. Okay.
I can't download the file.
It's not working, or?
Yeah. It's just single web page and available. I don't know if I'm the only one. Are you available? Are you available? Oh, join others. I'm in it. Yeah, you're just going
And I'm just going to sort of take a look. So everybody more or less has a laptop to follow along. Some of us do. So the biggest trick when you're using SketchUp and with the laptop is, I don't think any of you have a mouse. So that, it's certainly going to be a lot easier if you're using a mouse. Since most of us don't have a mouse right now, I'm going to join your pain and actually use SketchUp without a mouse. That way I slow down a little bit, because otherwise I'll move through the coursework relatively quick. For those of you who are just new to this afternoon class, again, my name is Dan Brown. I've been teaching SketchUp for about 5-6 years now. My background's in architecture. Got my Bachelor's of Science in Architecture from UNLV. There I was a national director for American Institute of Architecture students. And my first job outside of school was actually working for Google, teaching SketchUp basically around the country at Authorized Training Centers, as well as teaching other train-the-trainers. So I helped collaborate a lot of the curriculum that SketchUp uses for its coursework. From there, I started my own consulting company, basically doing SketchUp training and 3D modeling for architects and designers. And if you were here over lunch, you obviously saw a lot of that coursework. For today's beginner's class, I really kind of want to teach you the right habits in SketchUp. Some of you that were in the advanced skills class, I noticed a lot of you working on some projects, and you probably know a lot of the basics, but this is certainly a good refresher. And hopefully you'll learn some basic tips and tricks that you maybe forgot about, or can use further along in your use of SketchUp. So what we'll do, you'll see in that folder, there's an example of, I actually have to see what it's called. There's a roof type example SketchUp file, and don't open that yet, but basically what we're going to do in the first sort of half hour is just go over the basic 2D drawing tools. So again, who is this like sort of your first time in SketchUp? So what I want to really do is, in this beginning session, is set up your template, set up your toolbar, get you all set up so that every time you use SketchUp, you have the right layout. And then we're going to go through the large tool set and some of the drawing tools in SketchUp. So you'll notice in that folder, there's this folder called SketchUp Reference Cards. It's a PDF. This is, you can also find this online if you don't have access to this. But basically, this is a PDF reference card that you can print out. Hopefully it loads on this old PC. There you go. So this is just a PDF that you can print out, and it'll show you all the tools in SketchUp. So on the left, you'll see the large tool set, and that's the tool set we're going to bring up shortly. In parentheses, see a lot of these little parentheses, like here and here. Those are the shortcut keys in SketchUp. And really to become fast and efficient in SketchUp, use your shortcuts. Definitely use your shortcuts. Now, you can change some of these, and there's some that I'll mention as we're going through here. I'll show you what shortcuts I use. But based off of your workflow and what other programs you use, you may want to use similar shortcuts. That way, you're not doing shortcuts for SketchUp that are in AutoCAD or vice versa. So I'll show you some of those tips and tricks as we go through here. There's also a PDF in there for layout. Anybody familiar with layout? Just your hand? Okay. So layout, if you have SketchUp Pro, SketchUp Pro allows you to import DWG files. It as well allows you to export DWG files, export animations. With just the free version of SketchUp, you can't import DWG files and you can't export animations. However, with the Pro version, you get those features and you also get layout. Layout is like a paper space of SketchUp. So it'll allow you to create documents of, if you're doing a board that's 11 by 17, you can set SketchUp's model space and set it to a specific scale, annotate it, give it dimensions. So that's really what layout is for. And the reference card is there if you want to use that. You can download layout. It's an 8-hour trial, so you can give it a try. I believe there are educational licenses, so you don't have to buy the complete professional license, which will run you like $500. So hopefully not. So go ahead and just launch SketchUp. If this is your first time launching SketchUp, I'm going to try and get my screen to be similar to what you guys will see. As you can see, I have a lot of different plugins and tools in SketchUp. SketchUp's really just a platform for a lot of developers to create their own custom extensions for SketchUp. And there's certainly a lot that I use, so I'll show you those as we go through. Now, out of the box, if you just download SketchUp, you'll probably get something that looks like this. This looks pretty familiar to everybody. Pretty close. Might be a different screen if you're downloading SketchUp Make. I think the screen isn't gray, it's like a green or blue. Close enough. So this is sort of the welcome screen to SketchUp. What's great about this here, especially when you're first starting out, is you can check out the Extension Warehouse. Extension Warehouse are all those plugins for SketchUp. So I mentioned in the last session I used one that's called Podium that does like photorealistic rendering. There's extensions for like exporting to a 3D printer. So there's an extension where you can export into a .stl file. There's plugins for architectural workflow, for solar workflow, for just about anything that any designer would ever need. But more importantly, you can check out SketchUp Tips and Tricks, and that just sends you to a link to a lot of YouTube videos that SketchUp provides. definitely go through. There's a series called Getting Started, and there's also a toolbar series. So you can really take a look at a lot of the tools that SketchUp has to offer. The way I first started using SketchUp, probably like many of you, you got a studio project and you need to visualize it in 3D. So just got my feet wet and just started using it. My second year studio, I constantly went back to these video tutorials, although it was before YouTube started. They were just on SketchUp's website. But basically, I just went through every sort of tool and really started getting familiar and more comfortable with different tool sets. So definitely check that out. The last thing that we want to set up in here, you go down to this drop down for template. There's a couple of default templates based off of your workflow. The one, if you view SketchUp 8, you'll see one with a with a person. So every time you start a new document, say you get this guy in the model, you get this ugly sky and green ground. I hate this template. This template really sucks. The only cool, interesting thing is they change this person every year, or every year they use SketchUp. So I don't know who this guy is, but the guy before was Sang, and then there was Bryce and SketchUp 7, and there was a girl last year, I can't remember her name, but they're all like SketchUp employees, which is kind of cool. But for me, I like working straight from a plan view. I usually want to start in 2D. So I want to start from a plan view, draw from there, and then begin extruding my model up. And there's nothing worse than seeing a really cheesy SketchUp model where you got this ugly blue sky and this really terrible green color. So I don't like this template at all, and hopefully you don't either. So let's go ahead and change it. You can change it by going to Window, Preferences. On a Mac, sorry, I gotta speak both languages. On a Mac, it's SketchUp Preferences. Although it may have just changed with SketchUp 13, but I believe it's SketchUp Preferences. Scroll down to where you see Template, and then the one that I prefer using is the one called Plan View Feet Inches. You can just click on that and then click OK. You'll notice nothing happens in your model. What you have to do is just go to File, New. And once you start a new document, you'll get this Plan View Feet Inches. The next thing that we want to do is set up the toolbars. And I want to just set these up and show you, this is seriously the way that I've used SketchUp since SketchUp 6.
On the Mac, you have to click SketchUp and then go to Preferences. It's not one tool.
Oh, it's not?
Yes.
Gotcha. Yeah, so it's like over here by the icon.
Yeah.
For the toolbars, and this is a setup that I've had for forever, basically, instead of the getting, and for the PC people, follow along first, and then I'll explain it for the Mac because it's a little different. For the PC, I'm going to select the large tool set. I'm going to select the styles and the views tool set. And I'm going to place the styles up top and the views up top. And the large tool set, I'm just going to dock over to the left. For a Mac, it's a little more complicated in that you have to go to View, Customize Toolbar. Yeah, so there's two things. So for a Mac, go to, like you said, go to View Tool Palettes and select the large tool set. That'll give you the large tool set to the left, but any of the tools up in the top dock, you have to go to View, Customize Toolbar, and basically drag out all of those top tools. You kind of like throw them, it's sort of like throwing it out of the dock. And then drag up the Views and Styles palette, which I believe are in the top left.
Or can we just drag this default? Drag this sentence.
That's the one that I don't want, though. That's the getting started one.
Oh, okay.
So like, you have to click and drag each of those out.
Oh,
So if
from
you-
here.
Yep.
Oh.
And then you can drag up your standard views and your stuff. So the reason why I like this is all my drawing tools are on the left. All of my display settings and elements like that are up top. You can even put undo, redo up there. You can put your shadows to turn them on and off. Other ones I usually put up there are like my section cuts. You can activate and deactivate, as well as hide section cuts. So then I try to dock up top. And then you'll eventually have window palettes. And you'll see those as we work through, but basically anything under window, like entity info, these are tool palettes that you can, you'll get the paint bucket, you'll get this, you'll get shadow settings, there's a ton of them. But these tend to really take up a lot of real estate in your, on your computer. So a nice little feature of these, you can just click on the name, sort of the area at the top, and that's going to dock it for you. Another great solution is if you have dual monitors, dock all your tools on one side. Does everybody have their toolbars set up? See some nods. It's Friday, so stay awake. One sec. All right, so let's go ahead and start with the drawing tools. So I'm going to break down first just a large tool set. So to break down the large tool set, you basically have your line tool, paint bucket tool, eraser. These 6 are your drawing tools. So circle, polygon, line, freehand, arc. Then you have your modification tools like push, pull, offset, follow, scale, rotate, move. These are more annotative tools like tape measure to measure distances, to scale models, your dimensioning, protractor to measure angles, 3D text tool, which is great if you have to put 3D text along an item. And then the last 10 tools are more or less dealing with orbiting, panning, and zooming, which is very critical in SketchUp or in any 3D modeling program to get fluid with orbiting, panning, and zooming because you spend most of the time doing that versus actually modeling. So I'll give you some tips and tricks as we get into 3D for some of these tools. So let's get started with the line tool. It's also L as a keyboard shortcut. And although we can't really make this mistake because we don't have most of us don't have a mouse right now, but one important note that I want to make about SketchUp. SketchUp is a click and release tool. So what I mean by that, you're clicking and releasing, not click and holding, to activate any tools. It sounds really silly and simple, but rest assured, please just keep in mind SketchUp's always click and release. It'll make a lot of the tools later on in SketchUp a lot easier to use. So click on the line tool, start anywhere in this bottom left-hand corner. Go ahead and click and release just to start your line. And you'll notice you get this sort of rubber band effect as you're drawing with the line tool. You'll feel SketchUp snap to the red axis, which is your x-axis. You can also feel it snap to your y-axis, which is your green axis. And SketchUp's always waiting for your input. So as you draw that line, and as I have my cursor in that red axis, you don't type in the value control box down here. See this value box down here? You don't ever want to type in that. Instead, you just want to type on your keyboard wherever you are with your cursor. So in this case, if I want this line to be 14 feet, let's go ahead and type in 14 foot sign and press enter. Now, SketchUp also remembers your last command. So let's say you realize 14 feet isn't long enough. As long as you don't, you can move your cursor. I think so. As long as you don't move your cursor or enter another tool, you can change the value of that last command. So in this case, if I want this to be 16 feet, you type in 16 foot sign, and you'll see it update. Now, if you move your cursor or start another tool, you can't go back to that. You have to undo and then redraw. The nice little feature, though, see how it acts almost like AutoCAD in that you have sort of like a polyline. So it remembers your last location, so you can start from that position. You don't have to re-click to start there. So I can now move in the green axes. And let's draw this up 10 feet. And now for our red axes, everybody look up here. Eyes up here. There we go. All right, for this line here, you could type in, I think it was 17 feet. You could type in that distance, or SketchUp has inferencing. So what I mean by that is you can hover your cursor over this endpoint. See how that little green circle highlights? You can then move your cursor up, and you'll see this dotted green line follow until it actually snaps to that point. So you don't have to retype in that value of 18 feet. You can just simply hover and infer to that point and then draw it. Last but not least, you can draw a line and basically close the loop. And that way it creates a surface. Now, SketchUp refers to surfaces as faces, and it refers to lines that make up a surface or face called edges. So go ahead and just hover your cursor with the line tool over some of those edges, and you'll see a couple color changes in the model. For example, as I hover my cursor over a face, see how the cursor point turns to a blue diamond? You'll notice at an endpoint, it's a green circle. At a midpoint, it's a cyan circle. Anywhere on an edge is a red square. And in some cases, you'll see an intersection. It'll actually be a little X through your model. So that's always a good way to make sure you're actually touching the point that you're drawing from. You can always use that sort of inferencing, something like that. Now, unlike programs like 3D Max or Rhino that are solid modelers, SketchUp's a surface modeler. So think of it as paper, and all those edges that make up that paper are all really defined by that. So if you take the eraser and erase this edge, you not only erase the edge, but you erase the face as well. So you always need the edges in order to create the face. So to heal a surface, just take the line tool and just draw that line back in. Pretty easy, very straightforward. Let's get a little more complicated. All right, so I'm just going to select all of this and just delete it. And let's just move on to the rectangle tool. Let's breeze through these beginning ones just to get a good framework, and then we can really get into more fun stuff. With the rectangle tool, simple two-click process. First click determines one corner, and then the second click determines the far distant angle or corner. There's a couple interesting things about the rectangle tool, however. As you hover, you can see that dotted line that's going to give you a perfect square. And also, when you type in a value for the rectangle tool, you want to type in the X direction followed by the Y. So in this case, if I wanted 10 feet by 5 feet, I would type in 10 foot sign, comma, 5 foot sign, and then press enter. Now another interesting thing as you're drawing the rectangle tool, see this right here? Anybody know what a golden section is?
Yeah.
What's a golden section?
It's like 1.62, the ratio.
Okay. So what does that mean?
Okay. It means,
Why is it so perfect?
okay, it has to do with nature and proportions found in nature. That's part of it, I know.
Anybody else can help out?
It's been a while.
Very close, and I would probably do the same sort of explanation. Yeah, the golden section is sort of the perfect proportion based a lot of Greek and Roman geometry and buildings. So, it's a neat little feature here that SketchUp added in. So if you're drawing to a perfect golden section, you can use that. I thought I'd never actually use this, but when I model a lot of geolocated buildings from Google Earth into SketchUp, you're amazed at the amount of times that the golden proportion is actually used for a lot of those. So.
Can I ask, is it drawing in a particular scale when you start, or is it really just kind of infinite amount of space?
It's infinite. You can start at whatever scale that you want. I mean, if it's something conceptual and you're really just trying to do forms, you can model elements out. If you're just looking at something conceptually, it is giving it a specific scale, but you can actually go back. So like, let's say this is our form. You can go back with the tape measure, and you can actually measure a distance. So let's say this height here, and it's measuring out to 9 feet right now. I can redefine it and say, no, I actually want this to be 20 feet, and it will resize the entire model in proportion to that. So I use that a lot when I was doing initial massing models, just to get form and space. Zooming out a little too far. It helps you get the form and space right, but then you can tweak it at any time for scale. All right, so I have a rectangle. That's really the gist of the rectangle tool. Circle tool is this tool right here. Circle tool is the same command as the polygon tool, but I'm going to show you both just so you get a sense of how each work. One thing to note before you draw with the circle, and if you ever import circles from AutoCAD into SketchUp, SketchUp doesn't create true curves. It's a limitation of the program and of the software. What it does, though, is it creates them in segments. So by default, the number of segments is 24. And if I draw a circle right now, you'll see, maybe at this size, you can't really see the number of segments, and that's a good thing. But if you're drawing a large sort of arc or circle, you notice the larger you make this, obviously, the more segments that you're going to have in this model. You can easily change the number of segments in your model with the select tool. If you select the edge, so it highlights blue, go to Window, Entity Info. This is sort of like your properties. You'll notice there in Entity Info, it tells you the layer that the object's on, which we're always just going to draw on layer 0. It tells you the radius, so here you can change the radius, maybe on this 12 feet. And more importantly, you can change the number of segments. So I usually never change 24 segments. I always keep it at that. That way it keeps the model size down. For example, if you made this a column and extruded it, you're creating 24 segments on every column. And if you have 20 columns in your model, it can get pretty complex pretty quick. However, in this case, you may want to update this to 36, you might be doing more precise modeling work, and you need a higher precision there. Just two last things that entity info show. One is if you click on the face, it's going to give you the area. So this will accurately show you the area anytime in SketchUp. You can also select multiple objects. So if I have this selected and hold down Shift and select this face, you can see I can select two faces and actually see the area calculation for both faces added together. The other great thing is if I actually click on the edge of that circle, it's actually giving me an approximate measurement of the circumference, or the circumference. I went to school.
And that's based on it being a true circle, not factoring in the fact that it's these facets.
Right. Yeah, it's based off of the default radius there. So the polygon tool is the same sort of procedure. In this case, the number of sides that is default is 6. So it'll give you a hexagon. If you draw with the polygon tool, set your polygon down. So second click. There's two things that you can do after you click. Remember with the line tool, you could readjust your value. With the polygon tool, you can readjust the radius. So maybe I want it at 8 feet. I can type in 8 feet and press enter. I can also change the number of sides. There's a little shortcut that if you type in the number of sides that you want, let's say 8, and then afterwards put a lowercase s, and then press enter, it updates it to 8 sides. You can also change the number of sides before you draw the polygon tool. If you click to activate the polygon tool, you can type in the number of sides first. You can actually see the icon slightly change. So let's try maybe a 24-sided polygon. I'm going to draw it next to the circle here. And in plan view, you can just look up here. You don't have to do this example yet. But in plan view, these look relatively the same. You know, the circle at 24 sides, or I think it's at 36 sides now, looks relatively similar to the polygon at 24 sides. Where they differ is when you use push-pull and extrude the face up, the circle will hide the facets, so it'll resemble a smooth cylinder, whereas the polygon will segment it. Now, a quick little trick that you can do is with the push-pull, you can push-pull in these individual segments. And push-pull remembers your last push-pull distance, so you can double-click. And I'm just push-pulling each other segment. And it's a quick way that you can create sort of a gear. Now I'll undo. Let's say you accidentally drew a polygon and you want to smooth the edges. Take the eraser tool and notice what happens when I select the edge and I erase these faces. It erases the edges, yeah. All right, Dan, you get that. What you can do with the eraser instead, see at the bottom where it says Control equals soft and smooth? If I hold down Control right now and I select the edge, instead of erasing it, it's going to smooth it. So it's going to combine basically the two edges. Oh, sorry. Yes, option on a match. Sorry. Now, now with the face, smooth. If I go to push-pull, you can't push-pull curved surfaces. See how that's not allowing me to push-pull this? What you can do, however, you can go to View, Hidden Geometry, and you can see how it'll actually display those edges. And with Hidden Geometry turned on, you can now go in and actually start to modify that geometry once again. The next tool that I want to show, so go ahead and just, you can start a new document. I'm just going to draw a rectangle here in model space. One thing when you're working on a laptop with SketchUp, or even with the mouse, my left hand's always on home row. So my left hand's always on ASDF. Specifically, a lot of keyboard shortcuts are off of there, like R is rectangle, E is erase, T is take measure. I make group as G. The space bar is your select tool. Q is to rotate. Just sort of weird. A is arc. A lot of your tools are basically off of there, as well as when you're in 3D eventually, you use Shift a lot to pan. So if you orbit in SketchUp and then hold down Shift, it actually allows you to pan. So that way, that's always useful. But if I don't have a mouse, I'm usually using my thumb as my left click, and my index or middle finger of my right hand to navigate. That way, most of my left-hand fingers are still on those keyboard shortcuts. From here, let's draw with the arc tool. And we're going to create sort of a perfect fillet here. And basically, the arc tool is a 3-click process. So the first click determines the first endpoint. So you can click here, anywhere here on this edge. The second click, what you want to do is you want to hover your mouse until it snaps to that magenta color. That's going to tell us that that's a true 45 degrees, so that it's going to give us a perfect triangle there. Right triangle. So click there to set our second click. And then our third click, we're going to hover again until we find the magenta color. And that's going to give us that perfect arc for fillet. You can then take the eraser and just erase the outer 2 edges to remove those lines. There's another color that you'll see as you're using the arc tool. If you look up here, I'll show you. Let's say you draw from here to here. As I move my cursor up, you'll see a cyan line, and that's going to tell you that that is tangent to this vertical edge. So I can click there to set it, or if I move up further, you're going to get a point where it's tangent to the edge. The last sort of drawing tool is just the freehand tool, and I barely ever use this tool, so I won't go into too much detail with it. It's really only good for tracing contours. It's the only tool that's a click and hold. So you need to click and hold to start your line. Create your shape. And then release when you're done. And then you can erase any geometry in there. Yeah, it changes like your blue axis. That's okay. Once we're in 3D, it'll make more sense. It'll, because we're sort of looking on top of it, it's going to replace it. All right, so this is enough drawn in 2D. Let's actually do an example in 3D, and then that way you get more comfortable with orbiting around in SketchUp. So go ahead and open that example that we have. So it's the O1 roof type example file. All right, so if you take a look at this file, basically, you might get a little warning that it was created in SketchUp 8, but it should open for everybody. This is a good little exercise that I like showing. It shows a couple features within the modification tools. So we're going to use push-pull, offset, and most importantly, the follow me tool. Anybody use the follow me tool in SketchUp before? Yeah. Follow me tool is a huge time saver. So it's great to just kind of use some of these. What you see behind in the model are basically the final looking model of how it should be created. And then in the foreground are basically the setup files. So rather than us create each sort of framework, we're going to sort of build off of each exercise. That way you can think about ways to model things differently. For example, in the gamble roof, or even the second one, there's 2 or 3 different ways that you can look at modeling this. So I'll ask for some of your input on how you would approach modeling this, and then maybe give you some insight on some faster and simpler ways to do it. So first, to grade this gable roof here, just take the rectangle tool. You'll see I have some dimensions just added down there, as well as some guides. So go ahead and just trace a 20-foot by 20-foot rectangle in your model space here. And then go ahead and take the push-pull tool. So push-pull is sort of SketchUp's patented tool. It's P as a keyboard shortcut. Push-pull only allows you to extrude one face at a time. There is actually a plugin that will allow you to do multiple ones. I think it's called joint push-pull. But for this, really the magic with the push-pull tool is, as you extrude a face, it pulls out those elements with you. And as you're extruding that face, you can also infer to other geometry within your model. And this is really a time saver because you don't have to type in the value and press enter. You can just push-pull to a certain amount or infer to a certain amount. SketchUp also, again, remembers your last push-pull distance. So let's say you're doing a massing model or like a master plan of an area, and you just need some massing blocks. You can double-click on those faces, and it repeats the last push-pull distance. All right, so now we have the basic rectangle. What's an option that we have to create the roof pitch? What's sort of our first way that we create it? Any advice? So you create sort of the triangle of it. Yep, that's a good first approach. So there are some tricks with doing that. So there's basically 3 or 4 different ways that you could draw this. So if you draw from this endpoint here and try to draw this triangle, depending on your view and your orientation, it's going to be hard to find the exact midpoint. So a lot of times, what I'll have to do is you can press O for orbit, and you can click to orbit around. With the orbit tool, you can also hold down shift to pan. But here with the line tool, although this looks like it's correct in that orientation, when I go and click that and set it down, see what it does? It just draws it on that edge. What you want to do here is start from the, for a roof structure like this, you want to start from the midpoint, draw your vertical line up, and then draw the 2 lines over, and then erase the middle line. Because that way, with the line tool, you have more control knowing that you're in the blue axis. Remember, blue is your z-axis. So you want to make sure you're in the blue axis first. In this case, I can type in, let's say, 10 feet. And then I can draw a line down this way, and then a line down this way. Now your next step, you might think as well, I did that on this side, now I have to do it on this side as well, right? The answer is you can. You can draw all this line work and trace that out, but you're wasting steps. You don't need to do all this line work geometry. What you can do instead is take the eraser, erase this edge. That way this is one face. Then take the push-pull tool and push this face over. Now you'll see it actually pushed, there's a slight glitch with SketchUp. It actually pushed this and inverted the whole face. But you can take the line tool and you can actually heal that by tracing that back in. The other way that you could fix this, see how that's pushing and it's actually not leaving the face there? As you're push-pulling, you can press the control key and it'll leave that face there and start a new extrusion from there. And that will keep that face essentially staying there. Now if you notice in that, that was 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 steps, 5 or 6 steps to basically create that pitch. There's actually, there's actually a few more because you can, you have to erase this edge and erase this back edge, right? So that it looks like this. So now you're looking at 7 or 8 steps just to model that. An easier way, quicker way, is to use move copy. So in SketchUp, remember SketchUp's a surface modeler, it's not a solid modeler. And all the faces are made up from the edges. So if we have a line, we can actually take the line and move that line up, and then it'll force the angles or the pitch of the roof to follow it. So what I want you to do is just undo to get back to just the block. Take the line tool and draw a line from midpoint to midpoint. Then take the move tool, which is M as a keyboard shortcut, and move this line. You'll see it highlight blue. Move this line up and make sure that you're in the blue axis. If you're not in the blue axis, you're going to get something funky like this. We don't want this. This will happen. It does happen. Okay. Don't get frustrated. Just undo. Try again. A lot of this too, it's really dependent on your view. So you may have to orbit and sort of position yourself correctly. However, you can lock in a specific axis by pressing the up arrow key. It's going to force your movement just in the blue axis. That way, regardless of where you move your cursor, it's only going to lock in that blue axis. You can press the right arrow key, and that's going to lock you in the red axis. And then you can press the left arrow key, and that's going to lock you in the green. The great thing about using that inference locking is notice I can hover my cursor over that reference model to get that exact height. Anybody use the protractor tool in SketchUp? One, two, maybe. All right, so for our next example, and we'll try and move through these a little bit quicker, that way you guys have some time to do some Q&A. For this, we want to create a pitch that's at 512. So what I'm going to do is push-pull this up. I'm going to infer to the height here. And any guesses on how I could draw that? Or how have you used it with the protractor tool?
To do what, sir?
How did you usually create this with the protractor tool?
That's not what I would
Use it for something else. Okay.
do. Yeah.
Disregard. I'll explain that.
Okay.
So we can take the line tool and draw a line from midpoint to midpoint to create our pitch there. But we want to move this up to a certain height, and the height is dependent on that angle. So, and essentially, we need a guide. Guides in SketchUp are created primarily with the tape measure tool, but they only create lines that are parallel to whatever plane that you're drawing them on. What we can do is use the protractor tool, which is the tool right underneath it, and make sure that we're in the green axes here. We're going to click once to start. That's your origin point. That's your 0, 0. Your second point is your starting angle or your 0 angle. So in this case, I want to click anywhere along the face here for my second click. And then my third click is actually going to create the guide. So you can see the guide starting to be generated. You can actually snap. You can hover over and snap to every 15-degree increments, which is fine if we needed something at 15 or 30 degrees. But ours is a ratio. So what we want to do is type in 5:12 and press enter. And that's going to give us our guide at that specific angle. Now the next thing, look up here. Everybody look up here. Eyes out. There we go. So now we can take the move tool, but I can't just click anywhere arbitrarily to move this up in the blue axes, because it's hard to infer to that edge. What you need to do is take the select tool, select the line, take the move tool, and you need to move from this endpoint here up in the blue axes, and you'll feel it snap when it's on that line. Once you're done with the guide, you can just simply take the eraser and just erase the edge. All right, so moving along to the cross gable here. What we want to do, you'll see these two little tick marks here. Just take the line tool and draw a line from the top endpoint to endpoint. Take the push-pull tool and just push-pull that face out just to give a little extension of this house here, or this building. Next thing that you want to do, similar to the triangle that we have here for the hip roof, we want to take a line, drawing from the midpoint, draw it up in the blue axes, and then draw it back over. And what we're doing is we're creating a profile. So in SketchUp, with the gable roof, you could just take the move tool and move that edge up. However, to create a complex hip roof so that it's the same angle for our little bump out, what we can do is create a profile like this triangle, and then have that follow along the perimeter of the building and basically generate the entire form for us. And it's really simple to do. So once you have this form here, just take, well, you'll see if I took the push-pull tool, push-pull will only push to the far edge. It won't turn the corner for us. In that case, again, we need to use follow me. So follow me is this tool right underneath push-pull. And there's two ways that you can use follow me tool. I'll show you the hard way. This is the hard way first with this group. And then we'll show you the easy way with the hip roof next to it. The more difficult way is you actually first click on the face and then move your cursor, and you see this red line beginning to develop. And that essentially is the line or face that you want to follow. So as you notice, I'm just going to wrap around the corner. And I want this gable roof to stop here. I don't want it to turn the corner into a hip roof. I just want it to end here. So once you have that endpoint, just go ahead and click. And it draws in all of that geometry. Now you'll also notice it creates some additional geometry, and it actually hits that roof there, but we'll go through the steps to actually correct that. The reason why it creates this extra geometry is the width of this is wider than the width here, and then that way it creates that geometry. What it doesn't do, however, it doesn't intersect the faces for that geometry, so it doesn't intersect this face or line or this line. To force that intersection in SketchUp, you first need to select all of your geometry, and you can do that with the select tool. If you single click on a face, it just selects the single face. If you double click, it selects the face and edges. And then if you triple click, it selects anything that is touching that face. So after you triple click, you then want to right click and go to intersect faces with model. And you'll notice what it does is it actually creates the line work that we need for those two intersections. You can then take the eraser and erase the extra geometry that was created from that original follow me. If you accidentally erase an edge that you needed, it's not a problem. You just have to use the line tool and retrace that edge. So if you look up at our example, we can erase these two edges or three edges. We can erase this edge here. And there's elements there. So again, if you accidentally erase an edge like this one, you can simply take the line tool and trace that in. Now, if you're semi-OCD like me, there's actual hidden geometry inside the model. So I want to keep this model as clean as possible. And if you go to the X-ray mode, which is this icon right here, you can view through the model and notice those couple faces or edges that are created. You can actually take the eraser and erase those edges. This is actually particularly important if you're trying to do a 3D printing. You don't want any extra geometry within your model. You really just want the hollow shell of it. So that X-ray mode really helps you kind of verify that you don't have any of that extra geometry within there. The one thing that it did do here, though, is it hit our little addition here, and we want that straight. So to adjust that, we could use a line tool and sort of draw this out, or all the geometry is there. We just need to move the endpoint. So take the move tool, move this endpoint over in the red axes. And notice it's not inferring or snapping to a point. Just press the right arrow key to lock in that red axis, and now you can actually snap to that point. So that's the hard way of using Follow Me. It's if you have more detailed of a profile to follow, it can be very challenging to kind of take your cursor and sort of follow along all the edges. Where it's a lot easier is in this example, the hip roof, but this can apply to any other face. The other way that you would use the Follow Me is take the Select tool and pre-select the face. And by pre-selecting the face, you're telling SketchUp you want it to follow all the edges that make up that face. You can then click on the Follow Me tool and just single click on the profile, and it'll generate all of the geometry for you. Again, this is a really simple example of it, but you can do the same thing for the cross hip roof, as well as for the overlaid hip, just to see how that works. So again, pre-select the face, pre-select the face, and then click the Follow Me tool, and then click the profile. With both examples, you will have a little bit of cleanup to do. But again, remember, you can triple click to select all the elements, and then right click, intersect faces. Any questions about this? So far, so good? All right, let's move on to the mansard roof. Anybody know the history of mansard roof? Anybody know why they were popular? Nobody? All right, I will tell you. I like these roofs. So these roofs, right? They're usually very high pitched. They usually have, the windows coming off of here or shut and islands. The reason why they were popular, and this is always usually like the actual chimney or shingles, not shingles, the sort of roof on it. The reason why mansard roofs were popular was, I guess in the 17 or 1800s, you were taxed on the number of levels that you had in your house or the number of floors. And the attic space was not considered a livable area. So mansard roofs were popular because they weren't taxed on that floor. However, they were higher ceilings and were essentially livable spaces. So it's a cool little fact about it. And they look nice.
They just make their whole house like.
To create them, it's they can be a bit challenging, but we're going to use a tool called Offset. And we're going to use a feature in SketchUp called folding. So we're going to offset the inside angle. We're going to move that up or fold it up. And then we're going to draw the top sort of pitch. So to use offset, and I mentioned this in the advanced class, but anybody use AutoCAD? A couple. Okay. Use offset tool in AutoCAD? So it's not like offset tool in AutoCAD. So in AutoCAD, you click on the actual line and then offset left or right. In SketchUp, however, it recognizes the face and not the edge. If you actually go to click on an edge, you get a warning sign. You can't offset a specific edge. Well, you can, you just have to pre-select it. In this case, you can offset the face here. And what I want you to do is just click on the face once to start your offset. And then you can either offset outward or inward. We're going to move this inward. And let's do this at, let's say, 2 feet. Little shortcut for SketchUp as you're drawing in here. This actually bothered me for a while until I realized the shortcut. So when you're typing in distances for SketchUp, your default units is in inches. So if I type in, like let's say I want to type in 3 feet, you could type in 3 foot sign and press enter. Or you could type in 36, but you don't need the bracket. You don't need the inch sign. All you need to do is type in 36 and press enter, and it'll draw your inch values. This will save you a lot of time from having to press shift and press the value. So, you know, you could have it 60 inches, 48 for 4 feet, 24, whatever it is. And again, you don't need the inch sign for any of those. Now, once we have the offset there, what we want to do is fold this surface up. And we do that by taking the Move tool. And we highlight this top surface. So as I click to move, see how it's actually, it's restricting me. It's only letting me move along this plane. What I want it to do is force it up in the blue axis. So remember we had that up arrow key that locks you in the blue axis. Go and press the up arrow. And what that does is, because we have that rectangle and then we have the outer offset, is it forces it to fold. And you actually see the icon has this awful little fold element to it that you can't really see. But it essentially creates that beveled edge. So in this case, we can fold this up. And I can actually infer, again, over to our example, so we can fold this up 4 feet. Now to finish this off, we need to create the top pitch. Any suggestions on how to create that? And move it up? Exactly, yeah. You could take, you can basically draw an X from diagonal to diagonal corner. That's going to divide it into 4 equal faces. So if I take the line tool, draw there, divides it into 2 faces, and take the line tool, draw that from there, divides it into 4 spaces. Now, if you didn't know the move tool could move and fold your objects up, you may have started here to create your divide, or to create your center point, and then you can draw a line up, and then draw all of your faces individually. Which is fine, it's just that, it's another part of the process. A couple extra steps. So here, once you have the divisions, you can then click the center endpoint and just move that up in the blue axis. The last roof type is just our typical barn roof here. And this tool, we're going to use the arc tool. And what's really critical about drawing the first arc within this is you need to make sure you're aligned in the right axes. And you also need to preset the number of sides in your arc. So go ahead and click on the arc tool. By default, it's set to 12 sides. You can see that there. Type in 4 and press enter. That's going to update the number of sides to 4. And then when you draw this, you want to start from the beginning point, draw to the end point, and then the third click determines the, it's referring to it as the bulge. And here it's really critical, as you see with my cursor, you don't want to be on the green axis, you want to be in the blue axis. In some cases you need to sort of orbit and pivot so that it sort of forces it in that blue axis. And the bulge for this we're going to set to 10 feet to create the compound. Now, when you create arcs, and I notice some of you have tried it already, go ahead, after you create that, actually let's slow down a little bit. People are catching up. May have to orbit over one.
Seriously, it was like, no, but not that. Like, this is nonfiction. This is what
So
happens.
see how it's, some of you still have it as like 12 sides. You can take the select tool and select the edge and go to entity info and then adjust the number of sides to 4. If not, if it's not working, then just undo and click on the arc tool again, and before you begin drawing it, then push the number of sides to 4. Now I noticed some of you tried extruding this, and look what happens when you try to push-pull this. When you go to push-pull this, since the arc is a polyline, it acts the same way that a circle does. It smooths the facets. So see how it's smoothing this edge here and there? To prevent that from happening, before you push-pull this, select the arc and then right-click and explode the curve. So right-click, explode curve. And then when you push-pull, you'll be able to push-pull with those segments all separated as individual geometry. Any questions about this? So if your faces, see how they're reversed, you can take the select tool and you can right click on it and select reverse faces.
Okay.
Or if you have a lot like this one, click on a face that's correct and right click and then select orient faces. Sometimes that orients the mismatched ones correctly. So for the last 10 minutes, I'll open it up to any questions that you guys have. Also, if you're working on any projects right now, if you have them on your computer, I can certainly take a look and give some feedback or some tips. One other key tip or trick, especially for first-time users, if you go to Window, Instructor, Window Instructor brings up a little tool palette. It actually, go ahead and click on any tool in SketchUp. It will show a preview of what that tool does. And if it has any other features, like it'll tell you the move tool with control or command on the Mac, it'll move copy. It'll just also give a little flash sort of video demonstration of what the tool actually does. So this is great when you're trying to begin using some of the tools, but then also see how some of the tools are used in other ways. Did they get the same sheets? Yeah, that's fine. So there's just a sign-in sheet that's going around as well. If you want to provide your email address, I can email you to some resources, some of the stuff that I've shown, like some of the plugins that I've used. I'll just open up to any questions that you guys have. All over the place.
What are the secrets to getting things actually anchored in the correct place?
Half the problem sometimes is where you're getting the content from. So
You got to go to the warehouse.
yeah, so if somebody makes it on Google Warehouse, every component has its own origin point that you insert from. And in some cases, it might be far off in the model space. So as you're importing that, it's all over the place. The key way to kind of keep it simple is, let's say we want to put a window here. So I've got a window components. This is sort of a built-in browser for the 3D warehouse. So let's say I want this window. So it downloads it, and the good thing about this window is the inserting point is actually the bottom left-hand corner of the window. However, it's of the front of it. So as I place this, it's actually just placing it inside the model. So a lot of times what I typically do is just to sort of get it in the model where it is. And then as you're moving the object, you always want to make sure you pre-select it first. But then the point at which you're moving it from is really critical. So as I'm moving this object, I want to make sure I'm moving it from the back edge. And then that way I can set it in place where I need to. For trees and terrain, there's a lot of times you'll get say you have a tree, right? Sometimes sometimes these, bring in at like the wrong height. I don't have it installed here. There's a plugin that I have. It's called Drop at Intersection. If you have, let's say you have a curved slope and you import a lot of these trees, it's a pain in the ass to place each single one exactly where it needs to go. What this plugin does, it's a free plugin, it's called Drop at Intersection. I'll make a note so I remember. I'll send it to you guys. It allows you basically to right-click on any component, and then you can drop it at either the next face that it intersects to the ground plane, or you can actually specify Z height that you can drop it in at. So that's really useful in kind of placing components. Other questions? Come on, it's not happy hour yet. You got an hour till happy hour.
These items like the windows and things like that that you're bringing in, can you scale those and stretch them and make them larger and smaller?
Yeah, so one challenge with components from 3D Warehouse is they're done by other providers. So in some cases, they come in too big or too small. The advantage of that, though, is any group or component you can auto size or scale. So this tree, for example, it comes in at whatever size it is. Let's say we want the height of that tree to be 30 feet. What you can do is take the select tool and double click so that you're inside that component. You can then take the tape measure and measure the height. Right now it's saying it's about 50 feet. And I can type in a new value. So I'll type in 30 foot sign and press enter. And what it's going to do is resize the active group or component and not the entire model. So the one that I showed previously with the conceptual, that would just resize the entire model. This would just resize this active group. And if you had any copy of this, duplicate of this, since it's a component, it'll resize all of them. So if we had a couple of trees here, and we go to resize this one, you'll see how it's resizing the other ones in the background. Very important trick, and please write this down. By default, SketchUp is always at 30 degrees for the field of view. If you're ever doing interior renderings and you have a small space, you usually want to increase your field of view to 60 degrees. You click on the zoom tool. See how it is by default? The field of view is set to 30. That's pretty good for exterior renderings, but if you want a wider angle, what you can do is type in 60. Type in 60 and press enter, and it's going to increase your field of view. That way you can see more of your model. If you prefer working in like photography in focal length, let's say you want this to be 35 millimeters, you can type in, again, this is all within the zoom tool, you can type in 35, and then mm, lowercase mm, sorry, and see how it changes the name from field of view to focal length? This will replicate or simulate 35 millimeter focal length. You can also hold down shift and zoom in, and that's actually going to adjust the focal length. One other thing, and you'll notice it on some of the renderings that I've done. seeing how this rendering here and even this rendering here, see how it's a true 2-point perspective? So all the vertical lines are actually straight. In SketchUp, see how we orbit around right now? Like let's say we want to take a rendering or a view right here. See how not all the, it's subtle, but not all the lines, the vertical lines, are actually completely straight. They sort of jag. To force a 2-point perspective in SketchUp, go to Camera, and then click 2-point perspective. And that forces all of your vertical lines to be straight. And you can see that up in the top left as well. Another thing that you can do, you can do this a lot with floor plans if you want to do an axonometric or an isometric. I'll go to top view. And I'll go to camera. And then instead of perspective, click parallel projection. That's going to give you a true top view in SketchUp. You can also, these views here, you can also click a front view, back, left, and right. But you can also click this ISO view to get a true axonometric. So even as I orbit, everything is still true in that axonometric view. New little feature that's been brought in to SketchUp 8 is this little icon here. So we use the vanishing points. This one to the right of it is called back edges. And for me, I like this. It basically does a dotted line of the geometry that's back or hidden. And in some renderings, what I'll do is in Photoshop, I'll have my textures, I'll have my shadows, I'll render that, but then I'll put a multiply or multiply of just the hidden lines and then a multiply of the back edges on top of that to basically create a composition of the model. And it just adds another sort of level of detail, and you get to sort of see the geometry of the file. And that's in back edges. Any other questions?
Have you used the AR Media plugin?
AR Media, that. I feel like I've seen it. I know what the logo looks like, but I don't think I've been there. Oh, this is that thing that you place it up to the camera and it like shows the model.
I don't know. I just saw it. I'm curious.
Oh, okay. So AR Media, this plugin. Let's say you have a Mac and you have the camera on the top of the Mac or whatever. You have your screen. Basically, it's this plugin that you take like I think it's like a piece of white paper, and it displays your iCamera or whatever, and it shows like an augmented reality of your model, like through it, as you're like moving your piece of paper. It's pretty cool. It's more of a for fun thing. I've never really used it. Any last questions? Well, thanks for having me. I hope you guys enjoyed learning basics of SketchUp. There's a ton of resources online. If you filled out the sheet, I'll certainly send you an email with some links. There's hundreds, if not thousands, of videos on YouTube that you can find to learn specific things you're looking for. Thanks for having me.